Hi, today we're going to talk about the old King's Gambit and specifically the Kizuritsky variation. I don't like talking about openings too much, but every now and then it's good to break the monotony a little bit. And the reason why I chose the video on this opening is because I asked myself the question, what happened to the King's Gambit? It seemed like it was making this great resurgence in the 1990s. You know, there was like a couple of British grandmasters playing it, and even some strong, um, uh, Russian grandmasters and Latvian grandmasters were playing it. I remember Joe Gallagher, one of the British players. He had Short. Nigel Short was playing it. None. This was like the late 90s, and again, nobody was really taking it up as their main um, weapon, so to speak, against E5, but you did see it quite frequently. There was one master I remember, Grandmaster Alexei Fedorov, who was above 2600, actually using the King's Gambit consistently uh, in practice. And even during the match that Kasparov had against Vladimir Kramnik in 2000, um, when Kasparov was having troubles against the Berlin Wall, people were actually, uh, wondering if suggesting that the King's Gambit, might be a suitable weapon for Kasparov to try to use against Kramnik in the match. That would have been interesting, right? Seeing Kasparov playing the King's Gambit. Um, and then to answer the question, basically, what happened to the King's Gambit? Well, the top player in the world at the time, Alexei Fedorov, was invited to the Vikings tournament in 2001. Um, so basically, what you saw was the top King's Gambit player in the world, rated about 2,600, get thrown into the lion's den with all the, 2,700 and borderline 2,800 players at their peaks. I mean, Nand in 2001 was Anand, when he was younger. Same with Alexei Shirov. This is the players at their peak. Ivanchuk, etc. All right. So we're gonna look at a few games because basically what happened was he finally got to play. This is Alexei Fedorov I'm talking about. He got to play the King's Gambit against Anand um, round four, and Anand was able to equalize real easily in the Kizaritsky variation. Then a couple of rounds later, round six, um, Ivanchuk, crushed him in the King's Gambit, and then um, in a later round, he actually got the chance to play the King's Gambit against Vladimir Kramnik, and he did not. He did not even play the King's Gambit, so he was discouraged. And then after that, he basically, just really stopped playing it. Um, and that's kind of like what happened to the King's Gambit. And then after that, it was like, then you started hearing rumors about the, King's Gambit being refuted and stuff by Ripka and all of this stuff like that. Um, Never seen that analysis though. But anyway, um, so we're gonna look at a couple of games real quick. This first game is between Spassky and the French player Fresinet, and this took place in 2001. So Spassky, of course, was old at the time, former world champion. Play f4. He takes f4, knight at 3, g5. And this is the most principal reply to the King's Gambit. Of course, you see d6, there's fork weir and all this stuff. But we're talking about the Kizaritsky. All right. h4. Um, Again, all main stuff. The principal alternative to h4 is bishop c4. All right. And this is a good move, but the main disadvantage to this is black then has the time to consolidate his pawn chain with h6 and bishop g7. All right, Ain't all white can really hope for is equality there. H4, G4, and knight e5. Now this right here is the Kizaritsky Gambit. This is basically your heart and soul of the King's Gambit, right? There's knight G5. This is a piece sacrifice. This is called the Algar Gambit, and it's funny because I remember I lost on the black side of this when I first started playing chess. Well, not when I first started playing, but one of my early tournaments. I had never seen it before. It shows you how prepared I was. I never saw never saw this before, and I played right into it. The knight G5. I played H6, which is supposed to play the natural looking move. Knight takes F7. King takes F7. I took the piece, but I couldn't stand up to the attack that came afterward. Right, I got real uncomfortable and wound up losing the game. All right, but this basically the theory on this is does not offer enough for does not offer white enough for the piece. But again, in a rapid game or somebody's unprepared like I was, go for it. So 95 is the main line, respected line. And knight f6, this is known also as the Berlin defense. It's not as famous as its counterpart in the Ruy Lopez. Alright. d6 is another one of the main line, and I'm going to show you that in a couple of other games after this. Now, white does not have to worry about any of the other moves like h5, for instance. D5 here, queen e7, or knight c6. The main ones are d6 and knight f6. Theoretically challenging. So after knight f6, d4 by Spassky, and now d6. Now I like bishop c4 here, right? It is playable, but you don't see it in a lot of strong games. d5, he takes d5, and then bishop d6 is usually the main continuation. This game, d4 was played. d6, knight d3, knight c6. Now, knight takes e4 is always like the main move. And then after bishop takes f4, bishop g7, then c3, and say castle, knight d2, and g3, king d2, c5, bishop g5. This is unclear. Some players would prefer white here, and it's because just plainly because of the activity, and some players would prefer black here, figuring they can consolidate at some point, and be able to demonstrate the material superiority. So it kind of depends on what kind of player you are. I know that personally I don't like these kind of positions, period, for either side. It's a little too messy on the white side for me, and on the black side. I don't like my king just wandering around like that. So instead of knight takes e4, Spassky played this knight takes e6, pressuring the d pawn, c3, knight takes e4, bishop takes, and d5, bishop e2, now h5, protecting the g pawn, and we can see the game kind of settling down, and I don't see the activity enough activity for white to compensate enough for this pawn. His pieces begin to get traded off. We see black just is simply up a pawn here. And this is a typical King's Gambit endgame. King's Gambit endgame. Um, and the only thing that really white can hang his hat on is that this pawn on f7 is backward, and that black probably will not be able to, you know, push it forward to make anything substantial. So therefore, white is basically, claiming a draw here. Even though he's down a pawn, this pawn on f7 is, not, unless white makes some crazy errors, is not going to be able to, get to that point. But again, some players don't mind having a little bit, some type of attacking chances, and then ending up with an end game like this at the end. As long as they can have the chance to maybe attack or catch an unprepared opponent, um, sleeping in the early portion of the game. Okay, so now when I look at the game between Alexei Fedorov that I mentioned earlier, who was rated 2575 at the time, and against Anand, who was rated 2790 at the time. So Anand was a very strong player. Fedorov plays King's Gambit, and now we have d6, right? And like I said, the other move that's playable also is knight f6. So this move is basically came to the forefront as one of the major responses to the Kizaritsky Gambit. And the idea is that black simply returns the Gambit pawn right away in order to develop. So that's the idea. The old King's Gambit games that you saw back in the 17 to 1800 days, the players would try to hold on to the pawn for dear life, and then end up in all type of positional, you know, binds and such. But chess theory progresses, and the idea now is, hey, just give back the pawn and just get a better position. So knight takes g4. Okay, there's the pawn back. And now knight f6 with tempo against the e pawn. So Fedorov does not want to waste time, and he just captures. Of course, knight f2 is, holding on the pawn is possible, but again, losing time and allowing black to just simply develop another piece. For instance, knight c6. So it's not what I think of when you think of playing the King's Gambit. This quiet positional game. So knight c3, and idea, of course, one of the ideas inherent in the position, knight d5, and Anand simply ignores that quote-unquote threat, and like I said, to say threat with quotes, and plays the move knight c6. Now, previously played, of course, to meet that quote-unquote threat was c6, right, and bishop e6. Knight c6. Okay, and now the idea, or one of the ideas behind knight c6, is now if queen f3, for instance, or queen e2, will run smack into knight d4. So Fedorov jumps on it, knight d5. And queen g6. And now this move offers black full equality, even though the queen is hit with tempo, and this is threatened right here. Knight c7. Black also is threatening here, and it's check right here. And so now d3 is played. If knight c7, it just would be a blunder. King d8, and let's just say, for argument's sake, knight takes a8. Then it would be a mate in 2 moves after queen g3 check. King e2, and then knight d4. And you can see the purpose and power behind the move knight c6. And it will violate the spirit of the King's Gambit anyway for white to get so greedy, because it's supposed to be about rapid development. And you can see in this position, it is black who actually has the lead in development. So knight d5, queen g6. And going back to this move, I don't like knight d5 here because of that reason. I think that white should continue to develop. Maybe move like bishop b5, like keeping this knight stationed at home. There was also a gambit here with d4. And the idea is after queen takes d4, again, development. And then you go into this queenless middle game where there's still a lot of possibilities. And you get an ending that looks something like this. And there's opportunities for either side, although here I would prefer to play black. But here Fedorov played knight d5, queen g6, exclamation mark. And I think black had full equality there. Trying to think. Oh yeah, if he tries to, just step to the side with king f2. First of all, just queen g3, queen g3 check can be played. But the main blundering idea is if if queen takes e4, then the knight f6 would just win right off the back. Of course, nobody in right mind would do that. Bishop g7, c3, queen takes. And this is all good. But anyway, instead of king f2, bishop g7, black always has this move at his disposal. Then he can play bishop g7 here. c3 to keep the bishop off this diagonal. But then you can start exploiting some tactical and some dark square weaknesses in the position, playing a move like that. Alright, so d3 was played. There's the check. King d2. And now knight e7. Again, allowing the knight c7 idea. And again, you can see that this knight now is protecting this square. So if this knight goes somewhere, this is going to be curtains. So, queen e1 instead. And let's just show that to the people. Of course, knight takes c7, king d8, knight takes, queen e3, king c3, queen c5 here, check. And that looks like, actually that looks like a perpetual, because after, let me see, after this, that's what I was thinking at first. Doesn't seem like it works. King b3, it's amazing. Bishop e6, check, and then he does c4, blocking everything. Then he has this guy. So yeah, black, so after knight takes c7, black might just merely have a perpetual, which is amazing. I have to look at that a little deeper. So after knight e7, Fedorov played queen e1, and at this point, he's basically like throwing in the throwing in the towel as far as any attacking possibility is concerned. So Anon first damages the pawn structure. And now rook g8. And although the material's even, black has absolutely no worries in the position, and white is still struggling, trying to develop. Rook is coming to the e file. There it is, and just the equal endgame. So you can see how hard it was for white to get anything out of the opening there. Very difficult, and that's why you don't really see the king's gambit, especially at top levels, because it was extremely difficult to, after this move knight d5 and um, queen g6, very very difficult for black to white to get anything after that. So I think here after knight c6, improvements have to be made here with perhaps bishop b5, or even trying to gambit with d4 here, because falling behind a development the knight d5 and queen g6 doesn't seem to work. All right, let's move on. Again, so here's round 5 of the Rubinstein Memorial, and Alexei Fedorov versus Alexei Shirov. It's 2000. So Shirov is at the peak of his powers. Shirov has the black pieces, g5, and here we go again. Kizaritsky gambit, d6. Give back the pawn, and here we see this move, knight f6. And now we see a different move here by Fedorov. Now instead of knight takes f6 as he played in the Anand game, and he got absolutely nothing out of it, right? After knight takes f6, queen takes f6, knight c3, with the idea coming to d5, he got absolutely nothing out of it. Knight c6, exclam, knight d5, queen g6, he got nothing out of it. So instead of that, he plays the move knight f2, keeping the pieces on the board. Again, however, that loses time, right? Loses time. So what? So white's idea now is not the rapid development that is you see in like games of Paul Morphy and these older these older King's Gambit game that you see, like an Adolf Anderson. You see everything's about this rapid deployment of the pieces and development. What you're seeing here is that white is playing for a superior endgame. He's basically trying to take over the center. He would love to have his pawns on e4, d4. He's already gotten his pawn back, and he just wants to go into a superior endgame where he controls more space. And that's basically his concept at this point, because by losing time with knight f2, you pretty much make it very difficult to mount up any type of attack, especially in falling behind in development. So here Shirov just played a natural move, rook g8. He just put the rook on an open file, right? And there's the idea here is that in this position, if knight c6, then d4. And notice how white just simply gets his pawn center rolling. Bishop h6. And this took place in a game between Nigel Short with the white pieces and Alexei Shirov 3 years before this game. Queen e7. Bishop e2. Bishop d7. Knight d5 by short. Knight d5, e takes d5, knight b4, and c4. Okay. Actually, that was between it. Well, it was two games. One, it was Fedorov versus Jan Timman. Okay, and the same variation with Nigel Short, but instead of knight d5, Nigel Short had played bishop f3 here, and after castle a3 with the idea of playing b4 and stuff. Shirov played this move, knight takes e4, and actually equalize here. Okay, so here Shirov plays rook g8, leaves knight c6 alone, and plays rook to g8. There's d4, and bishop h6, knight c3, and now we see knight c6. Queen e7 was tried against Fedorov. Fedorov had the white pieces, and the black grandmaster was Timoshenko, Gennady Timoshenko, 98. And after Queen e7, knight d3 was played. You see there's pressure here against his pawn. Bishop g4, bishop e2 takes, knight c6, and then e5 was played here. So we see how white wants to operate with this center. Okay, so back to the game. After knight c6, Fedorov played knight d5. Knight takes d5, e takes d5, and queen e7 by Shirov. Bishop e2, knight b4, c4, bishop f5, and we see that something is wrong with that knight d5 idea, because you see immediately how black's pieces all spring to life, and you have all type of threats now. Knight c2, even d3 to some extent, right on the light squares. So now this is what Fedorov was banking on. So after queen a4, he says, hey, I'm going to pick up a piece. Notice again the development, and if you think of the spirit of the King's Gambit, again things is reversed. It looks like black is the one who employed the gambit, right? His pieces are swarming the position. White's king is stuck in the middle, and look at white's development. So king f8, Shirov parts with the piece, but it's no big deal because look at the rook on a1, look at the bishop on c1. All right, so after queen takes b4, rook e8, and we see now this poor piece is pinned down here, and notice that all the black pieces are involved in the attack, and this is not a good position or state to be in, especially against an attacking player like Alexei Shirov. Queen d2, rook takes g2, and now there's ideas of this pawn coming here, right? Not yet, of course, because the bishop would be hanging, but just the idea is in the presence, the midst. And sometimes you have to think of that. Like, don't always say, oh, I can't do that because of this. Just have the idea in mind, because eventually, say this king is here, and he can do a move like that because of the mate threats. But moving on, king f1. Shirov played rook g3. Now queen d1. Bishop e4, attacking the rook, the undeveloped rook. Rook h2, f5, knight takes e4, f takes e4, and those pawns are just brutal. Bishop g4, e3, bishop f3, queen g7, rook h1, guarding against g1, of course, rook g1, rook g2, and that was it. Fedorov resigned. If bishop takes g2, then just simply if bishop takes here, then just simply e2 check. Okay, so that was again, just blow, another blow to that line. Oops, sorry about that. And the last one we'll look at is from round 6 from the Chorus Vikanze Tournament 2001. This is Fedorov again with the white pieces, 25-75 against Vasily Ivanchuk, 27-17 at the time. Okay, so we're back at Kizaritsky variation, knight f6, d4, d6, and now we see this move knight d3. So we've seen different moves. The other moves entailed just the simple knight. I'm sorry. Other moves had entailed d6 first, and then giving white the option of playing knight takes d4. Here, Ivanchuk attacks the pawn right here, right away, develops knight, and so he plays right in the center, and now d6. So now, instead of gaining this pawn back, he shoots for the f pawn. Knight c6, putting pressure on the center. c3. So it's kind of like he has to choose his poison. So he plays c3, and now knight takes e4. Bishop takes f4. And d5. And you could, if you look at the structure on just concentrating on the queen side, we see that it's just a symmetrical structure, and that on the king side, the pawns are kind of busted up for both sides. Nobody has a pawn structure that you can be proud of, but black is up a pawn. So it's just an issue of basically whether white can hold or not, because he doesn't have enough going on where he can say he has some type of compensation for the pawn or in an attack or something. Now he's going to try to drum up an attack, but you look at the position, the pieces on the back rank, black is holding his own as far as development is concerned. So where's the compensation? And this is why you don't really, this is what happened to this opening, unless it can be revived in some meaningful way. Because when players win, via like some egregious blunder or like a swindle or something in time pressure, that's not enough to revive revive an opening. It has to be some type of concrete line that can be, relied upon. So, in spite of many different, tryouts, different moves, it just proves not to be, something that can be depended upon. So again, at the castle, knight takes e4, and notice how just black ends up with the lead in development here. Queen c2, queen e7. I'm sorry, queen e7, queen f6. And the reason why I said queen e7, because that's the move I was thinking of. Instead of queen f6, it's queen e7. And the idea that I had in mind was after queen takes e4, knight takes. bishop. And then you can play a move like f6. Of course, he doesn't have to play with the bishop. He can take like that, but then you still have the same thing. So, for example, bishop takes. Now you exploit this pin scenario, and of course, black is better. So queen f6 was played, bishop g5, and now queen f5. And I think here white should have just played queen takes e4 here. But it's hard to deal with queen take. It's hard to play queen takes e4 and go pawn grabbing here. See, the problem is if the queen takes e4, then boom, it's just free development. And this is why Ivan Chuck put his queen on f6. See, so in the event of queen takes e4, this guy comes out. And look at the lead in development once again. This is why Fedorov didn't take and just played bishop g5. But now the queen comes here, solidifies the pawn. So what is black going to do? The pawns are guarded. The black is threatening the e5 knight, so he takes. He throws that check in there. I mean, he didn't have to, but he threw the check in there, which is just annoying. There will be no castling on the queen side. So king d1. Bishop takes c6. So we see black's pawns are busted up, but he has a lot of activity and open lines and diagonals which to attack the exposed king, and he's up a pawn, right? And ahead of development and everything. Bishop c4, bishop f2, bishop e6, this move doesn't really do anything because of g3, just opening up everything. And again, from this position, it doesn't matter what happened. Even if white pulled out a miraculous win, you wouldn't want to repeat this. But just to show you the ending, just go through the moves real quick. You can see the saints go marching in. The pawns just, and Anand, I'm sorry, not Anand, Ivan Chuck just, just killed them basically. That was just brutal. After king g3, that's for those of you that are interested. After king g3, then the rook is coming to e3, and there's on the queen. The queen goes by, and if queen e3, then of course queen, if queen here, of course queen takes queen mate. But if king here, then the rook comes here and forking the queen and king. So that was a wrap. So that's all for the my take on the King's Gambit Kizarisky variation. I hope you learned something, and maybe some of you out there could put some fresh gasoline inside that tank of the King's Gambit. The King's Gambit has been written off many times in the past, but it's written off again. You only see it at club levels, or you don't even really see it in speed chess that much anymore. It's like people just like giving up on it and stuff. But anyway, I'll see you guys on the next video.